Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forget Me Not Radio, the podcast where we discuss taboo topics and other issues society would rather silence. My name is Amy Dommett, and I'm your host. Today, I had the opportunity to speak with Andrew Bridgewater, a chartered psychologist in the UK. I met Andrew on LinkedIn, and we started up a conversation. Andrew has a message to share, and I wanted to help him share it. There was so much power to his story. He has made it his life's work to help others overcome depression. Andrew shared his own experience with severe depression and hospitalization, the taboos surrounding mental health, and how others can make permanent, natural, and healthy changes to ward off depression and live a happy, fulfilling life. For more information on Forget Me Not Radio, you can visit amydommett.com/podcast. There you can learn more about upcoming episodes and guests, as well as support this project through patreon.com or PayPal. It is through supporters like you that we were able to bring this podcast series to you. Subscribe to us on iTunes to stay up to date with new episodes. And if you are already a subscriber, we would love to have you rate and review us. Your feedback is important. Thank you for joining us. I will see you on the other side, where happiness and beauty reside. Hi, everybody. This is Amy, and I am sitting here with Andrew. I'm actually talking to him long distance because Andrew is in the UK. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Amy. It's great to talk to you.
You too. Thank you for joining me today. Andrew, we've taken this podcast from a series that was ultimately going towards talking about taboo topics, but we've done a lot of talk about domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, because that's where my expertise is and that's what I know. But we're expanding that today to talk about your story and to add to these other taboo topics of society. So I really appreciate you being here.
That's a pleasure.
To talk with me and share.
My pleasure.
Tell our audience a little bit about, what it is that you experienced and, what you've been through, what you went through, and how that's a taboo topic. How does that fall into this realm?
Well, my taboo topic is mental illness.
Definitely.
And it actually manifested in a period of severe depression in 2006, which saw me go into hospital for 5 weeks. I was in what we call a psychiatric hospital in the UK, seriously ill, suicidal, very depressed. I was what's called psychotic, so I'd lost touch with reality, and I was imagining all sorts of sounds, sights, tastes and smells that weren't real. It was literally like a living nightmare. And it wasn't the first time in life that I'd been depressed, but it was by far the most serious. There were a couple of other episodes, much more minor, earlier in life, usually as a result of a sort of crisis or major challenge in my life. One was around my career, and the other was around a relationship. But the particular situation that arose in 2006, which I can go into a lot more detail on if you want to, that really blew it all out of the water. And in fact, I've dealt with far, far more challenging situations since without any impact on my mental well-being. But I didn't talk about it, Amy, for about 11 years because I was humiliated and embarrassed by the experience. The costs were quite severe. It did cost me my marriage, and that was a 20-year marriage. And I wanted to kind of just recover from that a little bit. But actually, just a few months ago, I was privileged to give a speech at my old school, my annual school reunion, which happens to be the school that William Shakespeare went to in Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwickshire in England. And I started my speech with the quote from Hamlet, which is from Act 2, Scene 2. And Hamlet says, "There is nothing good or bad, only thinking makes it so." And I can tell you a whole load of stuff around that, and we'll unpack that a little bit. But literally, I made myself depressed and ill with my own negative thinking around a problem, a situation, a real situation in my life. I wasn't making it up. But I don't think we realize just how much we do create our own reality through our thinking, and how much we can start to become aware of that, and it can have a massive impact on our physical as well as our mental health.
When I heard you speak, and I had told you this before, when I heard you speak on your radio program or your radio interview, that was something that really struck me. And I guess it's one of those, it struck me because it's something that I know personally I've thought of and I've discussed with people, kind of that manifestation that, you think it, you make it a reality type concept. But I never really put as much thought into it, especially to this, this magnitude, like that you could actually believe something so much that it could spiral you into such a negative place. And I assume that you could believe something so much that it could put you into a very good place as well.
Well, this is the point. And we are literally living in a virtual reality created by our own thinking. We've been conditioned to believe that the situations and circumstances of our life are responsible for how we feel. That's actually a massive misconception. It's not. The feelings are not directly coming from any external situation, circumstance, person, or whatever. They're actually coming from our thinking about that. Now, that does sound like a bit of a play on words, and I use the words deliberately, given the quote from Shakespeare. But the point is that once we fully understand the implications of that, we have a completely different set of options at our disposal. And it's not about doing a load of techniques. It's not about replacing a negative thought with a positive one. Personally, I found that exhausting, and it's never worked for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm giggling because I can relate. you can sit there and beat yourself all day. Yeah, saying, no, I'm going to think this. Let's look at it this way. And it's like, yeah, that's not working.
It's exhausting. It's literally exhausting. So not only does it not work, it's tiring. And every time a major new challenge comes up, you have to reinvent the thing anew. You have to come up with a whole new set of positive thoughts. Whereas actually, when you understand how your personal experience is created, and I can talk a lot more about that as we go on, then you kind of get to the root of all of this, and you realize that it's just your thinking, and you can either pay attention to it or not, act on it or not. And that's very, very freeing, actually. And it certainly has been for me, as somebody who was literally held hostage to their personal thinking for large parts of my life, which was really quite frightening, as I say, when it got very severe.
Well, let's go back to that, because I think, at least I'm a person that, I like the beginning to end, which funny, people that talk to me probably won't realize that because I'm often all over the place. But with that being said, I think it's important to lay that foundation, because if, a story often gives us a basis of understanding and something that we can relate to. You mentioned that on and off throughout your life that you've struggled with depression.
About three times. And as I say, the last time was the major one.
Was the major one. And I know I can speak to that as well. I've never had it, to the point that I've had to be hospitalized, but I've, struggled with depression on and off, and it's often been situationally triggered. Something comes up that, sets me in down a negative path that, just depending on how well I'm handling things determines how well I do in that situation. Yeah. But let's go back to what made this particular situation. Do you know what made it different from your past? Okay.
Totally.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Tell me about that.
And it's kind of, every time I talk about it and relay it, I listen to myself say it and I think, how on earth could I have been so entrapped? But what happened was, I decided that I wanted to create a sort of bit of a financial breakthrough for my family. We were doing fine and I was earning a good income, as was my wife. But actually, for whatever reason, I decided that it wasn't good enough. And I wanted to create more wealth, I suppose, for my family. And so what I did is I actually started on a huge sort of round of personal development seminars, courses. I went to Tony Robbins in 2006 and 2005, in London, something called Unleash the Power Within. I went to a Harv Eker seminar in New Jersey called Millionaire Mind Intensive. I did a 1-week neuro-linguistic programming certification course. I mean, you name it. And all of this was in the space of 6 months. And really what happened was, and it all makes sense looking back on it now, my mind couldn't cope with what was being fed to it. And I literally had an expectation that success was guaranteed and that I was going to become, very wealthy fairly quickly, because all I had to do was model these other people who were clearly doing it. And of course, when that didn't happen, there was this huge, oh my God. And actually, it's John D. Martini who talks about depression as being a big disconnect between how we expect things to turn out and how they actually turn out. And let's face it, what I've realized since is that none of us is in charge of how life ultimately turns out for us, whether we think we are or not.
Sure.
But unfortunately, a lot of the personal development gurus out there would have us believe, all we need to do is visualize success and well-being and walk on hot coals and do all of these other things, and it will be ours for sure. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. And I bought the whole thing.
Well, that would be a great conversation potentially for another day if we don't have time today, because I've often questioned, I've seen people go to, maybe not these seminars in particular, but these personal development and these, go, and they almost often seem like a recipe for disaster.
Well, I don't want to criticize any of the individuals who put those things on, I
mean well, I believe,
and I take full responsibility for everything that happened to me. I'm certainly not intending to place any blame at anybody else's door, and I think that's a really important rider on everything you say.
Definitely,
but absolutely, and I think unfortunately a lot of the personal development industry is predicated on the myth that you just need a blueprint that somebody else has followed, and you'll be fine. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. It really isn't. It worked for them, but it won't necessarily, by any stretch of imagination, work for you. And
everybody has, like, we've mentioned before, and it's funny, I actually just wrote something about this, but I think, when we start to compare ourselves to others or think that because it worked for them, it'll work for us, it like I said, this is probably a whole topic for another day, but it plays into this though, because we're not all built the same. Our path to success, whatever success is to us, is not the same necessarily. It's not that we don't have things in common, but oftentimes, finding our own happiness within our own lives might look very different from what somebody else is doing, but that's neither here nor there. So again, like I said, I can be all over the place, but you went to these seminars and you were finding out that wasn't necessarily.
Well, there's another piece of the puzzle. In doing all of this, I decided that I was going to investigate buying an investment property abroad. And I looked around, and a market that seemed to be doing particularly well was southern Cyprus, which is the Greek-speaking part of Cyprus. Cyprus is a large island at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. It's very close to Israel and Turkey borders on the northern shores, but it's well across in Europe. Lovely climate. It was just about to enter the euro currency at that time in 2005, so the market was very buoyant. And basically, I went over there on a couple of occasions, subsequently agreed to purchase a property, took a mortgage out to buy it, expecting that I would be able to rent the property to cover the mortgage payments and so on. And then fairly quickly after I'd committed to buy the property and engaged myself and my wife with the mortgage, the market slumped quite badly, probably about 25% in the space of a few months. So any equity that I had in the house was wiped out. I was looking at what we call in the UK negative equity situation. I'm not quite sure what you call it in the States, but basically
it's pretty much the same thing. Yeah,
right, the value of the property was less than the cost of the mortgage, the value of the mortgage.
Than what you owe on it.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So you think, well, I've just got a hole that I'm going to shovel money into indefinitely here. But then what also happened was that Cyprus went into the euro at a very strong rate. The Cyprus pound went in at a very strong rate against the euro. And my monthly mortgage payments doubled without any additional benefit to me. So it was literally...
Oh, ouch.
Yeah. So cut a long story short, as I say, I had an enormous hole that I was shoveling money into. And I literally made myself sick with worry. And I've thought about this a lot since. And in fact, funny thing is, I was in Cyprus last week and I recorded a mini series on how to stop worrying. And I deliberately did it from Cyprus because I wanted to kind of set the scene from, 12 years ago. Here I was feeling literally sick with worry. And now 12 years later, the situation is transformed. I'm transformed. Life it didn't turn out the way I worried it would turn out. And I kind of created this series of tips and things for people to contemplate about how to stop worrying, because worrying is pernicious. It's really quite toxic, and we don't realize what it does to our bodies as well as our minds.
And I think that's interesting because, I think too, that's in its own right therapeutic to go back to the place that was very negative to you at some point and rebuild from that in a way to help others. That's
well, it feels at least like there's something useful come out of it, because as I say, at the time, it was very hard to find a seed of anything positive.
Definitely. But that's, ultimately, that's what happens, especially with depression, is that you find yourself in a mindset that no matter how you got there or whatever the reasons are, it's very hard to see your way out. It just that feeling that you have at the moment and the way that you view the world at the moment, it's hard to, this is coming from a non-clinical view, but, for me at least, I know, when you're dealing with somebody that is majorly depressed, or you're going through it yourself, it's near impossible to see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's nothing good going to come of it. Nothing is ever going to get better. This is how it is. And you continue to feed that. You're continuing to feed that negativity into an already bad situation.
Sure. No, that's absolutely where I was. There was nothing positive was ever going to come of this. and let me just finish the story briefly. So I got literally to death's door within the space of about 4 months. So I worried night and day, to the point where I literally made myself ill. And I think I've now understood why that happened, because literally we release cortisol and adrenaline in such quantity. I did so regularly that I was flooding my system with poisonous hormones, and they didn't have anywhere to go. And so, I was literally a sort of suicidal wreck. And I was admitted to hospital for my own safety, put on very high doses of antidepressant medication, and then released about 5 weeks later, feeling a little bit better, because what the medication does do is it gives some symptom relief, but of course it doesn't get to the root causes of the problems. And then for the next 18 months, I was on the same medication, put on a lot of weight, as I was told to expect, which again isn't great for your mood. And I kind of gradually got myself back into society. I got a job again, quite a high pressure job, and did have 1 or 2 wobbles in that, but never needed any time off. I managed to pull myself together. But the point is that I got to the point where I was no longer prepared to be overweight on medication and still depressed. And that's when things started to change. I can remember the moment when it changed. I'd got into a lift in London at the end of a busy day's training, and there was a 4-way mirror in that lift. And those sort of mirrors, you look at yourself and you get a view.
They're not kind.
Yeah, the people get, but you don't most of the time. And I thought, ouch, I was 44, and I thought, what on earth is going to become of me? Fat, middle-aged, stressed out, unhappy. And I thought, right, the rest of my life is not going to be a repetition of this. It's not enough. So I made a decision at that point. The route being to cut oneself off from any other possibility. And I just said, I'm not going to live like this anymore. I'm going to research everything I can find about how to deal with stress and depression naturally, and I'm going to make it my life's work. And that's what it's become. And to be able to create something positive out of what was so negative feels very humbling and also very inspiring, actually.
Well, let me go back a little bit, because I think this is an important thing to touch on. You mentioned that you were admitted to the hospital for your own safety. And how did you end up getting admitted? Did you reach out for help? Did somebody intervene? What got you from that place that you were in, which is basically, suicidal and miserable, to getting the help that you needed?
Well, it was quite simple, really. I was told that if I didn't go in voluntarily, I admitted compulsorily. We have in the UK something called you can be sectioned. It's the official, it's the colloquial term for it. Basically, there is a part of the Mental Health Act, a section of the Mental Health Act, which covers people who are not in a fit state to be in society.
We have that here as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I would have been admitted compulsorily had I not been admitted voluntarily. So basically, I had no choice.
Yeah. Came in and said, "You're doing it, or we're doing it for you."
Well, yeah, you get they got the doctor, the health worker, and a social worker get together, and they can force you to go in. It's as simple as that. It's in that sense, it's a bit like imprisonment. So I could either go voluntarily, or I would be admitted compulsorily. So there was no choice.
We do have that. I need to look up the laws more. We have what's called a Baker Act, which I think is the same concept. However, I think there's more of a tie-in to it, and that you actually have to be potentially a threat to others. But I don't want to speak to that, because I don't know for sure the legality of it. But I'm just, I was curious about that, because I think, what I see with people that I've dealt with and worked with is I'm sure, just about anybody has seen. Oftentimes when people fall into a state of depression, or, are dealing with really any kind of mental health issue to where, they are not in a good place, whatever that might be, often are also unwilling to seek help, or unable to seek help, or embarrassed to seek help.
Yeah.
So, I ask you that question because it's like, how do we get from, if somebody is listening that is suicidal or struggling with depression, or has been fighting depression their whole life, or some other mental illness that is affecting them, in a negative way, how do you get the help that you need whenever your mind is not telling you that you need help?
Well, a lot of this can depend on your doctor, your medical practitioner, how well clued up they are with this. And unfortunately, many, particularly, because we call them general practitioners in the UK, they're not experts in this particular topic. They're generalists. And I found that, you have 10 minutes to speak to somebody, and in reality, all that they can do in that time is write you a prescription for a drug and tell you to come back in 3 weeks' time and get some more. And that was literally...
I just heard another podcast on this.
Right.
Yes.
So it was very difficult. Unfortunately, the system isn't set up to provide the support that is needed. At least it wasn't in 2005. And part of my mission is to be able to throw a rope to people, or to show them how they can get help in ways which, are not necessarily in the mainstream, because it's just not there. The resources aren't available, and neither is the understanding.
Definitely.
And that's become a life mission of mine, because I think I literally had nowhere to turn. I didn't know what to do. Nobody could help me. And that was a really frightening place to be, on top of everything else that I imagined in its existence.
definitely.
So coming back to your point, what do you do? I mean, I think the challenge is things have to get pretty bad sometimes before we really acknowledge it, because I was in denial for a long time. We all have a bad day every now and again. We all have a series of bad days every now and again. But when does a series of bad days become an episode of severe depression? And one of the problems with something like depression is it's defined by its symptoms. And clearly the symptoms are just the symptoms. You're not actually looking at the depression itself. You're just looking at how it manifests. And it's not really enough to make a good diagnosis. And what I found is as soon as it gets labeled as depression by the medical fraternity, then it kind of acquires a momentum of its own. And I remember, when somebody says you're clinically depressed, and it's, it doesn't actually help.
No.
It didn't help me. I thought, great, thanks for that.
Yeah. Kind of knew that might be a possibility. That's not helping me. I think that is a struggle that many people deal with. And no matter what it is that they are struggling through, we find that with abuse victims as well, that, it's easy for somebody to say, oh, you're in an abusive relationship, or, oh, that person is toxic, or, oh, you shouldn't be in this situation, or, oh, it's dangerous for you to be in that situation. But it's like, yeah, no kidding. Thank you for that information. It's like, if I'm willing to listen to you, if I'm willing to hear what you're saying, those words do absolutely nothing for helping me in my situation, because we need solutions.
Well, I think what we need is understanding.
Yes.
And I think what was missing for me was a real understanding of what I was going through. I was talking to doctors who had no personal experience of depression. That's take nothing away from their competence, but in a sense, I just wanted somebody to understand what I was experiencing, with a view to being able to offer me some genuinely useful help, and I didn't find that.
I think it's very difficult. That's such a basic statement right there in and of itself. But, again, I take it back to my experience and to what I've seen so many experience. It's, I've said that time and time again. I just wanted somebody to understand what I was dealing with in my head.
Yeah.
And when people say, oh, you shouldn't feel this, or you're out of the situation, or, oh, look at you, your life is great, that doesn't take away how I feel.
Sure.
And you not understanding, then, I often say, if you haven't experienced it, it's very difficult to comprehend it. It would be difficult for me to comprehend certain situations because I have not experienced. I can sympathize with you. I could maybe even empathize with you, but I can't fully comprehend and understand where you are right now.
And I don't think any medical practitioner needs to have had that experience to be able to help. But
research
it would have helped. It would have helped to at least have had some options. And there were no options given. It was drugs or nothing.
Yeah.
And again, for me, there was a massive pressure not to take drugs, because it was just like an admission of failure. Oh God, I'm on the antidepressants. That I've quit. I've given up. And I felt very resistant to going on to antidepressants. And I can remember my family's sort of whispered conversations between themselves as I'd gone on the antidepressants, feeling so humiliated and embarrassed that here was me, a chartered psychologist, a 44-year-old man, father, a husband, a business owner, who literally had to stoop to being on antidepressants. Now, I don't want anybody listening to this to feel in any way ashamed. You absolutely no need to. And I don't, that was just my feeling at the time. And actually, they were incredibly helpful in getting me over the worst. But then I had to begin to cope with my own healing, because antidepressants won't heal you. They'll just give you some symptom relief, as I said.
Right. And I think that's important, though, because I think that part of the reason that we're even having this conversation is that oftentimes it is the view of society, or what we perceive the view of society to be, that, that holds us back from making progress. And it doesn't mean that is correct or not, or accurate, but it is how we potentially perceive it based on what we've seen. So somewhere along the way, you had the idea that you would be looked down upon or because of the use of
Medication.
antidepressants, medication. And I think there's often a stigma attached to many things, which is why we call them taboo topics.
Yeah.
They're things people don't want to talk about. It's things that the people whisper about behind closed doors, or, oh, yeah, guess what's happening, or, oh, what. We're not having these open conversations, It's not like, oh, good for you, you're getting help. More of us should be getting help it's this conversation that we have in whispered tones.
Yeah, I think things are improving, and particularly in relation to antidepressants. I mean, I honestly think in the last 12 years, it's not as difficult to talk about as it was. But nevertheless, there are still people who will make a judgment on that, and that's, I've come to realise that's their issue, not mine. If we need help, we need it. And unfortunately, a physical illness is something that people can understand. So if you had a heart attack, you have a stroke, you have cancer, you have diabetes. I'm not minimizing these things. They're all very serious, but people can kind of get their heads around that. Mental illness doesn't show. You can't spot somebody with mental illness very often. You can't see it. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. You can only get a sense of it by how somebody behaves publicly. And very often you can put on a good impression as a seriously depressed person. And I had so many people tell me that they couldn't tell there was anything wrong with me. I looked normal until I started to lose vast amounts of weight. I saw a photo of me in early 2006, and I looked skeletal. I had no weight on. Before the antidepressants. I stopped eating. People either gain or lose an appetite. I had to lose it, but there is no visible evidence. So, as I say, one of the problems with mental illness is it's invisible. And that makes it even harder to talk about. Because you can't stand and look at a chart and see an X-ray of something that's broken.
Yeah, very true. And like you said, it's all, when it is diagnosed, it's often diagnosed by symptoms, and then the symptoms are treated. But you talked about the underlying issues. You said that the medication, that there's, if I heard you correctly, you're saying there's a place for medication.
I agree. There is.
Definitely. But at the end of the day, it treats the symptoms, that come from the depression or from the mental illness, and it doesn't actually treat the mental illness itself.
I believe so. I mean, clearly, this is quite a contentious topic, but I actually feel that it has a role to play to get people through a particularly difficult period. And what's required then is some support to then transition, because nobody really knows what the long-term consequences of taking these medications are. They haven't been around long enough now.
Right.
So, I don't know what the prognosis will be, but the point is that there were sufficient side effects, unpleasant, and weight gain was just one of them, that I realized I could not be on these long-term. And without feeling that it was having some implications. So that's when I decided to go out and research everything that I could find. And there's a huge amount, actually. Some of it's quite hidden. But there's an enormous amount of information.
I think just like, again, I used to say the same thing, because it was 2009 when I finally left my husband. So it's been going on, 8-10 years, that I had a hard time finding information about what is abuse, what is domestic violence, is this actually happening to me, where do I get help? It was hard to come by, where now there is a lot more information. So maybe, I think with mental health, as you stated earlier, things are slowly shifting, where there's a lot more information and a lot more discussion and a lot less stigma attached to it. But you still have to know what you're looking for and where to look. You
do. And this is what prompted me to write my own book, actually, because I realized that everything that I'd researched and found needed to be pulled in one place. If only for my own benefit.
Right? It's
But
amazing
actually,
how that happens.
it's been fascinating because I've had some really good feedback on it. And it's basically what I've done is I've written a book which looks at the physiological and the psychological approach to dealing with depression. So physiological, what sort of simple lifestyle changes can you make which will enable you to be more resilient, which will increase your stress threshold and enable you to handle life's ups and downs more effectively. And actually, it makes a massive difference how well you look after yourself. I think we all know that on a base level, but then we ignore it at our peril, and we can handle much higher levels of stress when we are looking after our well-being properly. And so I've written a 12-week program in Fit for Business, which is all about how to set up nutrition and well-being practices, which literally hugely increase your threshold for stress. And then there's the whole psychological approach, which I'd like to touch on some point in our discussion, which I've learned sort of more recently in terms of how we create our personal experience, and how much that is the world that we create. We're literally living in a virtual reality of our own creation. I know that sounds quite dramatic, but it explains an awful lot when you think about it, certainly in relationships.
It really does, because, I would say perception is reality. And I used to, that phrase used to irk me to no end, because it's like, no, it's not reality. But, perception, it is not reality. But then if you look at it from a psychological perception, it may be your reality.
Well, it
might not be the reality. Which I always, it used to drive me crazy, because I'm like, perception is not reality. Reality is not, your perception is wrong. That's not what's happening. But there might be some truth to that.
Well, let's talk about thinking. Let's talk about thinking rather than perception. So the point is, and I used the Shakespeare quote at the beginning, there is nothing good or bad, only thinking makes it so. In other words, it's not the situation or the circumstance, but our thinking about that. So take my example in 2006. I had a tricky situation to deal with where I was shoveling money into a hole, and I felt that I was going to bankrupt my family. That was the circumstance, but my thinking about that was what caused me the problems. It literally ran riot to the point where I became psychotic and paranoid about financial things. I literally thought I was bringing down the world financial system. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is just that crazy. Now, that situation could have had a completely different effect on somebody else with a different thinking pattern or a different reaction to it. They might have thought, okay, this is tricky, but actually the market will turn. It will change eventually. There are ways that I can recoup the loss. I can remember a friend saying to me, well, it's only money. You can earn it back again. And I thought to him, so, well, you just don't understand. That was not my view at that time. Those words didn't help me. But the point is that it was my thinking about that situation. And what then happens is that you have thinking about your thinking. So you think, actually, this thinking's making me feel awful. Oh my God, I'm going mad. And it literally spirals seriously downwards.
You get caught in a loop.
Yeah, and I couldn't sleep for weeks on end, and of course when that happens, sleep deprivation kicks in. We all know how serious that becomes, and you add that to the depression, you literally want to die. I wanted not to wake up the next morning. So but it's the thinking that's creating that. And there's a lot of stuff out there about how to change your thinking, but as I say, unfortunately I haven't found that to be successful. I've found it to be hard work to try and change what you think. You always need to come up with a new angle on it. It's never really solved the problem for me. What has solved the problem is a different understanding about how we create our personal experience. And that for me has made a massive difference. And I'll tell you why it made a difference, because I'd explained how I became psychotic and I literally created a living hell on earth. that was an extreme version of what we all do every day, actually. We are all creating our own experience of reality through our moment-to-moment thoughts. And those thoughts create how we feel. There is a direct connection between how we think and how we feel. We all know this intuitively. But we will place the blame elsewhere. We'll say, oh, it's my partner's fault that I feel this way, or it's my boss's fault, or it's the economy's fault, or it's the downturn in the property market, or whatever. It's not actually. It never is. Right. And that misconception causes all sorts of problems, not just on an individual level, but on global levels. We have wars about things like this.
So true.
It's incredible. And I feel extremely optimistic that a new paradigm around psychology is emerging. And it's even being called Psychology 2.0, about how we create our own experience of life through our thinking. And then when you know it's just your thinking, so it's like your own virtual reality goggles, you can choose to pay attention to it or not. You can choose to act upon it or not without getting completely hijacked by it. Because I used to think it was real. I used to think my thinking was true and real. It's never true. It's never real. It's a variation on that. Some of it might be true, but it's never all true.
Let me ask you something. And again, I always tell people, which those who know me, I often say, I can speak to my own personal experience. I don't, have the background in psychology or psychiatry, or social work. I've not studied it obviously in depth as you have or others have. But what I've noticed in my own life, and something that you touched on, that this brought this up, is that I've often told people that I work with, I said, for me, it is recreating my memories. It's recreating my reality, which doesn't necessarily, mean that I'm forgetting, or it doesn't mean that, I'm ignoring. But like in my situation in particular, maybe it's different, maybe it isn't, but in my situation and many of the people that I work with, we're talking about people that are often triggered by past events. So they've experienced trauma, they've lived with years of abuse. There's good and bad mixed into that. It's often hard to differentiate. And you find yourself reacting and, having an anxiety attack, or, spiraling out of control over something very minimal to, if somebody else from the outside looked in, they'd be like, what in the world? What's wrong with you? You're like, I don't know. I can't explain it. And oftentimes even myself, I might be triggered by something or find myself anxious and not know why. And I have to kind of pick it apart and figure out what exactly happened that caused me to react a certain way so that I can then address that particular issue. And on a bigger scale, I like to use the story of Walt Disney World, which I don't live far from Walt Disney World. And I used to go there all the time with my ex-husband. That was like our big, happy, wonderful thing to do. That was when he was on his best behavior, when he was happiest. It was a good experience generally. And after our divorce, I went to Walt Disney World and I had a meltdown. And I was depressed and I was miserable. And I was angry because this was a place that I had liked long before he came into the picture, and one that I intended to enjoy the rest of my life. But I was reacting poorly to it. And I realized that for me, it was my thinking. I was walking into Walt Disney World and I was allowing my mind to be just overwhelmed with memories.
Yes.
Which then led to guilt, which led to me questioning myself, because a lot of those memories were good and positive. Like, maybe he wasn't abusive. Maybe he wasn't so bad. Maybe I'm just imagining this. And then I'd start to basically be hyperventilating and crying and it would just be this overwhelming wash of negative feelings.
Yes.
So after I found my way, and after a lot of therapy and a lot of work, and I realized that that's what was going on, I then made a point of, when I go to Disney World, I say I recreate memories. But I do this in so many aspects of my life, where if something reminds me of him for whatever reason, good or bad, I'm like, I can't live in the past. I can't live in that place. But who am I here with now? What am I doing now? How do I feel right now in this situation right now? And I focus on that. And that becomes my new memory.
Okay.
But it's taken years. It's taken years to be able to do that. It's not something that happened overnight. And I don't know if that's what you're speaking to, but when I heard you talking about this in the past, that really struck a chord with me, because I was like, oh my gosh, that's kind of what I'm doing in my own way. So, it never occurred to me how much, like you said, how much our thinking can, affect how we feel, how we perceive things, how we look at things, or what we believe to be true.
It's everything. We live in a thought-created world. We can't experience life. We can't experience life other than through our thinking. It's just the way we're wired.
And I found that to be so... It's funny. I found it to be such a novel concept. It really wasn't, but you took something that I had felt for years and you managed to put it into words. And I know you had told me before, you're like, this isn't all me or whatnot, but you managed to put it into words. And I heard you saying, and it really helped me wrap my brain around something that I was trying to help other people with. And, I guess that leads me to, let's talk about what you're doing. You've touched on it, but let's talk more in depth. You mentioned that you're a chartered psychologist. For those that don't know, can you explain a little bit more about what that means? Because in America we have different.
Sure. Well, I guess in the UK, in the US, you might call that a licensed psychologist.
A licensed psychologist.
So I have to do a psychology degree and a master's level degree in psychology, plus 5 years of signed off work experience in order to be accredited by what in the UK we call the British Psychological Society. So it's just a formal accreditation of a profession, really, in the same way that engineering and accountancy and other professions have that sort of accreditation. So that's the way it works. But as you know, and everybody else,
was your work.
Yeah,
this was your work before, so I think that's important to touch on. This was you were working towards it.
No, well, I'd actually qualified as a chartered psychologist in early 2005, and ironically, 2005 was the year that it all started to unravel, and then came to a head in the early part of 2006. Maybe that's no accident, I don't know. But the point is that what I've realised since is that everything I'd studied hadn't actually equipped me to deal with what I experienced and what I see other people experience. A lot of it is quite academic. And it certainly wasn't real world enough to head off what I experienced. But in a way, that's kind of life's elegance, giving me what I needed, not what I wanted. And how often does that happen?
Probably way more often than we all want to admit.
Yeah,
a bigger version, I'll admit. But
so this was when I really started to learn about the profession of psychology. And maybe that was the chartership, and the whole of the rest of it had just been a piece of paper. But the point is that I hadn't come across this understanding about how we create our experience through my formal professional studies. Now, let me use a sort of parallel here. Up until the mid-19th century, people believed that disease and infection were spread by bad smells. Now, that sounds ridiculous to us now. People used to carry around posies of flowers to ward off disease and infection. Now, we laugh about that. And then somebody came along and said, actually, it's not the bad smells, it's these tiny little things that you can't see with the naked eye that are causing these diseases and these infections. And the doctors said, don't be so ridiculous, show me the evidence. And they continued not to sterilize their instruments, not to wash their hands. And of course, patients continued to die on the operating theatre in their thousands. And then finally, the accepted wisdom was that actually disease and infection are caused by these microorganisms, these bacteria that we can't see. It's nothing to do with bad smells. Now, this is kind of where we are with psychology at the moment. And what I'm talking to here is it's massive, actually. And yet we live in a world that is constantly looking backwards for the answers. And we're dredging up the past to provide solutions for the future. The answers are not in the past. The answer is not to go back to those memories, not to go back to those feelings. That's like poking a scab and expecting it to get better by being poked. It will get better of its own accord when we actually understand that there's a natural healing process at work here. So we are all innately mentally healthy. We have this ability to heal ourselves mentally in the same way that it's like a penicillin for the mind. It will find its way to the right place if we just let it. But all too often, and I did this spectacularly, we get in the way.
Oh, such a good point. It's the truth. Yeah.
And I'm seeing a fantastic
build our own walls.
Yeah, I'm seeing a fantastic turnaround in the way that that psychology is going to work, and it may not happen completely in my lifetime, but it's happening. And for me, psychology hasn't delivered, and this is coming from somebody who is a professional who has spent 20 years training in this field. It didn't deliver what I felt it could have delivered, both for me or for the people that I work with. And I was disappointed by that, because let's face it, I think one of the reasons I went into it was to try and fix myself.
Yeah.
Well, if I can understand myself better, maybe I'll get something out of it, and then I can kind of help other people understand themselves better. And as I say, the real learning came afterwards.
But isn't that ironic how that happens? So many people that I've talked to that are making the biggest impact in people's lives are making that impact because they've personally been down that path. And, again, something that I say all the time, I say, the more that I share my story, the more people come to me and share theirs.
Sure.
Because you're more relatable. Yes. And you do understand, and people can, they can connect to, your authenticity, where it's not that other people don't mean well, but I think we often know who understands us and who doesn't. And obviously we feel the most comfortable learning and growing and getting support from those who understand us.
Yes.
And I've seen it, with the people that, that are supporting those in human trafficking or supporting those in domestic violence. I've seen it with those that are supporting survivors of molestation and incest. Those that are making the biggest impacts are the ones that have been there themselves, because they truly understand what others have gone through. And I think also when you experience it yourself, it's that extra piece that perhaps it's your healing. As you stated, you said, I needed to figure it out.
It's huge what you just said. Yeah, it's part of my healing, but then it becomes an opportunity for me to help others heal.
Right, because you learn and you understand and you comprehend and you have potentially, gifts or abilities that enable you to take that information, to decipher it, and to then support others in their journey and in their healing and in their understanding of what they're going through.
Yes, and as I say, we all actually have innate mental health within us, and if somebody else is with you who can convey that in some way and just be with you, just listen with nothing on their mind, it's amazing what can happen when people really connect on a deep level.
True.
And yes. I'm filled with hope and optimism. In the world that we live in, we talk about Brexit here, and the challenges that brings, and a certain president in the United States. And
I was going to say, we've got things going on all fronts.
Yeah, and we can't let ourselves get down by any of that. There's nothing we can do to influence it now. Those decisions have happened.
They're made, they're done. It's like time to move forward with good, positive thoughts and reality.
And we can do that. And that's the difference between being at the effect of a circumstance or a situation and feeling powerless about that, which is a horrible place to be. And I say I've been there, versus actually everything's fine. I'm innately healthy. I have everything I need. I have freedom. I have security. No matter how much or how little money I have in the bank, those things are actually innate. They're given to us at birth. We've kind of lost connection with them as we move through early childhood and we develop our own identity. But toddlers don't need therapy. They're not. We don't come out of the womb needing to talk to somebody about our psychological problems. No. We learn them, and I just find this fascinating.
And I think too that, and this is just me, I guess, my kumbaya moment is that, there is so much happening in our world all around us all the time. And it doesn't matter, what your political views are, what your religious views are, what your, views are on war or any of those things. The reality is that the world's going to keep turning and that bad things are constantly going to happen. But there is so much good going on too. Absolutely. There are so many individuals that are working hard to just create good in their own lives and happiness and joy and, and that are reaching out to others. And there's so much good in humanity, but we live in this world where, I always say that the internet, right, is a blessing and a curse. It's amazing because, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for the internet.
No.
I mean, on so many levels, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would have never met. No. We would have never connected. We would have lived on opposite sides of the world and been living our lives and not known that the other one exists. But we did connect and we did get to speak and we're able to share because, one of us doesn't have to fly to another country. We can have this conversation and record it online, which is,
yes.
It's such an amazing concept when you think back to 20 years ago.
It is. I mean, I call these things
however old I am now.
everyday miracles. We take them for granted. I'm sitting here on a cold night in a warm house. The lights are on, and I'm talking to you on the other side of the world. If that isn't a miracle, what is?
Can I rub in that it's, sunshiny and warm here and I have my windows open?
Oh, thank you. Well, I was in the sunshine and warmth last week, so yeah.
Sorry, that was just cruel.
No, that's fine. I'm loving the thought that it's like that in Florida. Wonderful.
Well, it's so interesting. That was another, just a side note on this is that, as I think I shared this with you. I don't know, but my other job, the one that pays the bills, is teaching online, which is another thing that would never be happening if it weren't for the internet and the technology that we have today. Where I sit here in my own home every night and I teach little kids in China English.
Yes.
And we have these conversations all the time. I love it. They'll take their little iPad and they'll show me outside their window. And, it's like pitch black and 1 a.m. here. And they're like, oh, look, the trees are changing colors, or there's the apartment next door, or they're driving. I have one little boy that takes his class in the car every day on the way home from work on the way home from school. And he'll take his, shine it out the roof or out the side windows to show me where he is. And you're able to develop these relationships and create these communities that whatever purpose they serve a purpose. And we're often, I think, especially if you're susceptible to it, you could easily be drugged down with the negativity that the news is constantly throwing out there, or what's going on in your respective government, and the reality is, like you said, that those things happen, and we can't really change or influence that all that much. We have some options, but we can't do a lot about it. But you also can't let that, so many people, when Trump got elected, there were people here having meltdowns over it. Like, really? Let's focus on our homes, our friends, our family, our lives, and take that energy and use it for positive
Totally agree with you.
for good.
I totally agree. And I think it's just a question of what you look at. There is, as you say, so much to be optimistic and positive about.
Yeah.
And we
have to find it.
And you have to, yeah. And as I say, we have this wonderful ability to be sort of self-determined in our lives through our own thinking. We're not created all the same. We're all unique. We have free will. We have a free will to be who we want, think what we want, be around who we want, work with what we want. And that's a remarkable gift, actually. It's a fantastic divine gift. And it can either get us into trouble or it could be incredibly enlightening.
Well, like you said, it's all about how you think. And I know actually not that terribly long ago, I had a conversation with a lady who had provided me with a lot of counsel. And I said to her, sometimes I just wonder, why is this happening to me? I just don't understand why this is happening to me. What's wrong with me? And she said, well, you need to change your way of thinking, Amy. She says, it's not why is this happening? It's not why is this happening to me? It's why is this happening for me?
That's a nice distinction. Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is just one word.
Yeah.
And like you said, sometimes the worst situations in our lives or things that we look back on and go, how did I survive that? Or things that we thought we wouldn't survive when we were going through them, oftentimes lead us to other things that, I can't see myself doing anything else now, but I would not be doing this.
This is the beauty of the conversation we're having. We're only having this conversation because we've both experienced hardship, which actually felt like the most difficult thing we'd ever encountered in our whole lives. And look at the blessing. Look at the other side of it.
Yeah. Which you just don't see at the time.
No, you don't.
At all.
No. And that's something else I would say to people who are kind of going through it at the moment. Just hang on in there because the wind will change direction.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it sometimes, but it will.
Well, tell me, I do want to get into just a few more things about what you're doing, but let's talk more about that. If you were to give people a takeaway, which you kind of just did, but what would your suggestion be to people that are struggling or people that are currently trying to heal or come back from a negative situation, a traumatic situation?
Well, what I would say is, first of all, there's a huge gift in this for that person, and as we've just been talking about, it's very hard to see when you're in it, but it is there, and it will be given to you, and you will realize it in due course. And very often that gift is not just about your own healing, but as we're talking about, being able to help others heal. And that is a huge privilege, actually. There's nothing better. It's kind of given me a real life purpose, as I'm sure it has you.
Yeah.
And wow, gosh, that does feel hugely empowering and very exciting. And very humbling as well. So that's something I would say to somebody who's really going through it at the moment. The gift will become apparent. It just isn't right now. And the other thing is, please ask for help. I think often one of the problems with something like depression is that we kind of recoil into ourselves. We hide ourselves away. I certainly did. I didn't want to be around other people, but actually there were other people who were willing to help me. And in the end, it was other people's help that got me out of it. And without that, I might not be here. So please ask for help, get the help that you need, and don't be embarrassed and afraid to do that, because we all need a hand every now and again.
That is very powerful and very true. I think, I know I did the same thing. I thought nobody would understand what I was going through. And I hear that. I've heard people say, I'm a very private person, or, I don't want everybody knowing my business. But you know what? Sometimes you need to reach out.
Yeah,
you say, hey, I don't have a grasp on this, and something's not okay, and I need help.
And your pride is really not that important. And it's that's
definitely
something I didn't get right for a long time.
So true. Well, you had mentioned, and I know, I know I'm connected to you on LinkedIn, so I see some of the things that you're doing and that you put out there. But where can people find you? Like, where
Yeah,
can people? You mentioned that that you just recorded a series. You have your
sure.
book. You do put things out there to help people that are in these situations and dealing with this
Mm,
particularly
mm.
with mental health issues, with depression. Where can they find that information?
Okay, well, I have a website at andrewbridgewater.com, which contains a lot of the information that I've been alluding to. I've written a book which is called Fit for Business: How to Deal with Stress and Create a Healthy Work-Life Balance. That book is accessible from the website. It's also available in paperback, ebook, and audio format on Amazon and Audible, because I wanted to package up what I'd learned into a set of lifestyle changes, and that has made a massive difference to me, because I was not only able to shed that excess weight that I gained, 50 pounds in 18 months, but I was also able to transform my health and energy levels to the point where stress has such a different effect on me these days. And when you combine that with this different understanding about how we're creating our reality, that's made a huge difference. So I work with people one-to-one, and I also I run group coaching programs. So every so often I'll get a group of people together and we'll have a series of sessions on a medium like this, and we'll talk about how we can get stronger and get better, and deal with the challenges that life brings, both from a physiological and a psychological point of view. And I also have lots of free material out there. So, as I say, I've just created a 7-part mini video series in Cyprus, and I wanted to do it out there specifically because of the experience I've told you about. That's
I love
called
that.
How to Stop Worrying. And I started with a video up in the mountains. I was out on my bike with the pine forest in the background at 25C. That's about 80 degrees your temperature. This was last week.
Right?
And then I
Are you
ended
ready
up,
to go back to Cyprus now?
nearly. And then I produced some others on the beach, down with the sea lapping in the background, and just sharing tips on how to stop worrying, because I see so many people who are worrywarts. Worry can easily become a bad habit. And it was for me for many years. I kind of learned to worry. And I think all of us do. Again, we don't come out of the womb as worriers. It's something that we kind of adapt to. And I think there's a lot of different understanding that I want to convey around worry, because I think it's such a waste of life. And one thing I do want to say, there's often a big sense of I'll be happy when. I think some of us are mortgaging our future happiness. Actually, you can be happy right now. You've got everything you need, whatever the situation.
That's
big shift.
that's a hard truth to come by,
Mm.
or come to, I should say. But you
Mm.
know what? It's such a huge piece.
Yeah. It is huge.
Why wait for tomorrow? Why wait
Yeah.
for tomorrow? Why wait for tomorrow? Why wait for tomorrow?
And how often have we had this? Oh, is that all it is? If we achieve that goal that we've set ourselves a huge target to do, and yet, don't mortgage your future happiness. You can be happy right now with everything you've got.
Yeah.
That's just a small change in mindset. And a number of other sort of similar points that I share in that mini series, which I just want to convey to people that we've all got everything we need in order to be happy and well. We've just forgotten that sometimes. And we are set up in life to be happy. It's ourselves that mucks about with that.
Yes, truth. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. I will I'm going to put your website attached to your podcast on my webpage as well.
Great.
So people will be able to find a direct link to it if they didn't catch it. But again, that's andrewbridgewater.com, spelled just like it sounds.
Yes, with an E in the middle of Bridgewater.
Yeah, exactly. So, but thank you, Andrew. Thank you for sharing your story and for telling us, how you got to where you are. And thank you for your work, because we need lots of people like you out there.
Bless you. And thank you for everything you do on these topics. Difficult subjects to talk about, hugely important subjects to talk about. And thank you for being courageous enough to talk to me and other people about them. It's hugely important.
Hey, you just have to learn to be able to stick your foot in your mouth and you're good to go.
Absolutely.
I joke about that all the time. But you know what? I've learned so much from people from speaking to them. And that's my hope, is that others will be able to learn from listening. There's so much we might think we know about or think we have a grasp on. And when we put a little bit of time and effort into learning more about it, we can learn so much, and that enables us with tools that we need to better support those that we love and care.
Exactly. So much. So important. Thank you so much.
Great. It was great talking to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to the rest of you joining us, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.